Liberating Visions, Human Fulfillment and Social Justice in African American Thought, authored by Robert Michael Franklin. Why were you inspired to do such a book like this?
Well, that book is actually the revised dissertation I wrote at the University of Chicago. And I asked the simple question, in 100 years, which prominent thinkers, African American thinkers, will we still continue to read and can still continue to consult for their wisdom about two fundamental categories, the great ancient Greek categories of who is a good person and what is a good community? And I was intrigued in ethics and moral philosophy with those categories. What is the nature of the good life? What is the nature of a just society? The good person, the good community. And I asked, who offers real wisdom about these topics from the African American community? And the reason I happened to focus there, apart from my own identity, I realized there was wisdom in these books that no one knew of, and that someone had to mine those texts and bring them forward and place them into dialogue with other thinkers. And so I did that in the dissertation and invited, and the way in which I set this up, I asked, if I could invite 4 thinkers to a dinner party, who they'd be. And another way I phrased this was, if you're going to carve 4 faces on the side of Mount Rushmore, who would be these lasting thinkers in the African American community, who are they? And they were Booker T. Washington, the founder of Tuskegee Institute in 1881, William Edward Burghardt Du Bois, W.B. Du Bois, first African American to earn a PhD from Harvard University in 1900. Malcolm X of Detroit and Omaha, and then Martin Luther King Jr. From Atlanta. And so I placed them in a kind of dialogue about the moral life, the just society.
You also attributed certain names or tags, if you will, to their lives. Booker T. Washington, as he's an educator and administrator, used the term adaptive life. What do you mean by that?
Well, Washington was the only of these 4 figures who himself had been a slave. He'd been born in 1856 in Virginia. And so he knew both that side of life, the subservience, the constricted freedom, etc., as well as the life of a freed person after 1863 or 1865, following the war. And so Washington was an advocate for a more accommodationist, incremental, adaptive life. He also argued that it didn't make a lot of sense for black leaders to immediately urge full participation in American society and focus on voting and the like. He says, people who have never organized their own lives as free persons have to take baby steps in democracy as citizens, and should first have the means to sustain themselves. So he focused on economic self-sufficiency. And so it was that adaptation to the immediate challenge of moving, 90% of African Americans in this country were slaves. And so moving that population from enslavement to freedom. And I think that was his genius and his burden. And this adaptive life was understand your context, adapt to it, provide people what they need immediately, rather than what just sounds good.
The second person you invited to dinner, as you mentioned, Du Bois, kind of he's a social scientist, political kind of propagandist, and you attributed to him a strenuous life. And frankly, I just, for those, I forgot, but the same date that there was the March on Washington in 1963 was the same date that he died.
Yes.
Again,
yes.
so it's sort of a passing of the torch there.
Indeed. So the adaptive life, Booker T. Washington, W.B. Du Bois, the strenuous life. Now Du Bois is born free in Great Barrington, Massachusetts. And as he wrote about it, one of the few African American families in that town of Great Barrington in the 1860s. Du Bois was a student at Harvard during the time of the father of American psychology, William James, as James served on the faculty. And Du Bois came to be an avid student and protege of William James. And so I write a little about that relationship. Du Bois was often a student in the household of the Jameses. So Henry James and William James and the James family really grew to love Du Bois and appreciated the quality of his mind. And so he was a frequent visitor at the James household. And it was at a time when William James was working on his theory of the moral life in terms of living a strenuous life. And what I liked about that metaphor was this notion that life should be lived in alternating rhythms between striving for excellence and perfection and hard work and sacrifice and dealing with the trials of life and resisting them, and then disengaging in times of rest, Shabbat, renewal, enjoying contemplation, poetry, the aesthetic side of life. And it's that alternating rhythm that James regarded as important for sustaining a good life. You can't stay in that high-powered mode all the time. And Du Bois liked this as well. He used a phrase, after he earned his degree, he came to Atlanta and actually taught at Atlanta University, where Morehouse is a part of that complex. And so we have lots of lore and stories about W.B. Du Bois and the strenuous life that he advocated there, the life of hard work and hard play.
He wrote this concept regarding the two-ness. One ever feels his two-ness, an American, a Negro, two souls, two thoughts, two unreconciled strivings, two warring ideals in one dark body whose dogged strength alone keeps it from being torn asunder. The history of the American Negro is the history of this strife, this longing to attain self-conscious manhood, to merge his double self into a better and truer self. And that's what you just mentioned.
Yeah. And you put your finger on one of the most important texts or tropes from Du Bois, and one that has been used by so many other thinkers to name the challenges of being kind of an ethnic minority, but also part of the whole. And Du Bois felt, every Italian American, every Irish American, every Asian American could identify with this striving to merge the particular and the more universal into one whole and healthy self. And it's just wonderful the way he diagnoses that phenomenal process.